The reason why we didn't do Genesis 21 last week and we focused on worship is because I had a plan. And that plan was to go into Genesis 21 on Mother's Day, because guess what? Guess who becomes a mom? Sarah. Amen. So that's perfect. I held it off for that because I wanted to be able to go through this chapter when we've been building up this whole time to motherhood. And that's where we're at. So Genesis 21 is a good reminder that God keeps his promises. He cares for the broken, but he also is teaching us, or his people, to trust him beyond what we can see. So oftentimes we only trust God with what we think we could see or have control with, but God's promises are always on time. The word impeccable means without sin. And I love that word impeccable because his timing is impeccable. Yeah. So impeccable means without sin. And so that's what God's showing us here, is that this promise of what? That you will have a child has been delayed for a long time. And we talked last week that this moment was actually a moment of laughter. You know, Sarah was laughing about this. But now God's speaking and things are changing. And so you all know today is Mother's Day. And it was pretty profound that Genesis 21 is with the miracle. But this miracle, guess what? It was wrapped in wrinkles. But at this point, Sarah was old. Yeah, I think Abraham was 100, she was 90. So 90 years old. Obviously, in this moment, we know this is a miracle, and that's why I said it's wrapped in wrinkles. Not to belittle Sarah, but she's not a young mother. It's just like if we were doing this in modern day context, Sarah, to be promised a child, what do moms usually do when they know they're having a baby come? Prepare. How? Nest, nurseries. Yeah, we get a theme for the baby's room, right? You get all these. Yeah, you have all these things. So could you imagine that at this moment, Sarah was promised this promise, and now she's an older woman? And we're getting into this moment of motherhood. This is something that she's yearned for a long time, even to the point it became, she told Abraham to sleep with Hagar, and that caused conflict. That created out of that was Ishmael, right? So Abraham became a father where Sarah still was empty nested. And so in this moment of what today is, she's actually a woman that waited through disappointment. She waited and was experiencing other people's joys of motherhood all around her, but yet she didn't get the promise that she was told when she was thinking. And that, what does that do? And doubt, comes into the picture. Embarrassment where all these other women, and contextually, that was a huge thing to be able to provide a child for your husband to carry on the name, especially a boy, right? And so that embarrassment comes, and she's sitting with all this guilt. How many things you think, well, if God hasn't opened my womb, what have I done wrong? Mentality. I mean, we're guilty of that. It's not that we've done something wrong, it's that we're trying to rush his timing. But yet we want to put it back onto as something we've done wrong. But then all of a sudden, but God, he comes and what he spoke, he's going to fulfill. And that's what we see here today. So Mother's Day it's hard. It's hard to preach on Mother's Day because you don't know what type of woman you're preaching to. Here we see that there could be women that are laughing and longing. There's joy and there's sorrow with motherhood. There's some women that weren't blessed with kids. They're still waiting for a child. There's some that their child has passed on, and there's some that their childs are teenagers. So some mothers today are really rejoicing. Like, God has blessed me. God has given me these gifts of children and motherhood. Some are exhausted. Some are actually grieving still. Some are praying for children today, and they might be creeping up in age. Some are actually carrying regret of what they didn't do right. But some are just carrying memories of what was. So that's hard. It's really hard for Mother's Day to be something that turns into a church tradition, because I don't know if Mother's Day is completely and utterly honored on all facets of what motherhood looks like. Some people are vicariously living through motherhood through another person. Some are aunts that have been more of a mother than the mother has ever been. So when we look at when Isaac's finally born, and that's what's going to happen today, Sarah says, and I love this, God has made laughter for me. What did Sarah do when God said you're going to be pregnant? She laughed at him. Well, now she's saying that God has made laughter for me. The woman who once laughed in disbelief is now laughing in joy. This is this moment of where the grace of God can take this cynical laughter and then turn it into worship. We can't miss this moment of what Sarah is experiencing as she is becoming and stepping into this realm of being a mother. And this chapter's not just about the birth of a son. This is about what? Faithfulness of God, right? Everything that this chapter represents is God is a God who keeps his promises. So if we're sitting here and we are dependent upon human strength, you're focusing on the wrong thing today. If you're purely just focusing on your own strength, that's going to lead in heartbreak and that's going to lead in disappointment. But what you're going to have to focus on today is the faithfulness of who God is, and that his promises are going to be delivered in the time that he says is right. You be faithful. Motherhood, things will look better. Some things God's going to heal to the moment of maybe you will never have a child, or maybe you're never going to see your child again, or maybe you're blessed with a child, but God's in the middle of all those different aspects. He's in every single aspect that you have. But at the end of the day, what's missed with motherhood is quiet prayers, restless nights, worry for the well-being, sacrifices that no one says, good job, mom. Good job, mom. Sometimes you don't ever get that. It is nice that day when maybe a child says, good job. Like, hey, at the end of the day, you long for those words. But what the child and the family misses is the tears that you hide, the moments that you break down in the closets and the bedrooms and the showers that no one sees. But what we can see is, even though those tears are hidden from the family, what else we don't see necessarily is for mothers that are good mothers, that are persistent mothers, that are obedient mothers, or the seeds that are being planted year after year. Today, mothers have the option of planting two types of seeds, one that grows into dead fruit and one that grows into God, which will promise life. And so what are you planting on Mother's Day into your family? But mothers, as I'm writing this, what I look at is endurance. I can't do what Emily does. I don't have the mindset. I don't have the nurturing heart. I don't have what the qualities of motherhood she has as a father. I do have the offsetting qualities of a father that is equally needed in a relationship, but I don't have what Emily has. I don't have the same mindset as her. I don't have the same heart as her. And when her love is hurting, I hurt. When her love is hurting, I don't know how to help her sometimes. When her doubts and the things that life and curveballs throw at motherhood, because just like Sarah, she waited and waited and waited and waited. And when was blessed with this gift from God, everything fell apart, right? But in that moment, things were really falling into place. She's able to be the mother that God intended her to be, even though it went through trials and tribulations and heartaches. And so in this moment, they pray when things seem hopeless. Mothers pray when things seem hopeless, but they keep showing up. And that's what today is about. It's about, I had a good conversation with Jen, is motherhood should be honored just like fatherhood and Easter and all these different things. It's a day in and day out thing. This is a posture of heart. It's what you do every day. Honor God in everything that you do, every day, any day. You don't need one day of recognition. You want to give this to God every day. This is the moment of thanksgiving. If you do have a child, you should be hitting your knees or in your bedroom and thanking God for the blessings he's instilled in you. If you're still waiting for a child, then you should be thanking God for the moment that you have the ability to wait for a child and a promise to be fulfilled. But I'm still going to focus on the face of God. And so today we're going to go into Genesis 21, and this is not just to celebrate motherhood today. We're going to stay consistent with what we're doing here, but this is really a moment to where we can sit here today and say, God, he's a God who remembers. He's a God who provides, and he's a God who brings life whenever everyone else sees what? Impossibilities. That's who God is. And so chapter 1 is filled with tension. It's filled with tears. It's filled with the wilderness. It's filled with worship. And so if you do have the app, if it's working for you today, the notes are in there. But what we can see in Genesis 21 is the mine's title is the birth of Isaac. And so we're going to have babies crying. We're going to have tents of Abraham and Sarah that we've all become acquainted with. And so it moves to a mother weeping in the wilderness, and it ends with Abraham finally planting a tree and calling the name of the everlasting God. This is the chapter. This is what it's going to be. And, Genesis 21 today, God is doing what he says. This is not symbolically. Sometimes in the Bible we see the symbolical nature of the words, but today this is a full fulfillment of the words exactly spoken. Right? We can see symbolic nature when King David was crying and weeping and he flooded his room with tears. That's symbolic. Like we've all cried hard and we've probably cried a lot in our lives, but we never cried in one moment that we filled our whole bedroom with tears where it was flooding. That's symbolic, but not here. This is God's fulfillment coming to fruition. It's coming to Sarah, a barren woman, is giving birth. What a blessing. And this is an old man that gets to hold the son that was promised. Abraham already held a son. Can you imagine the heartache that went through, what he's going through with that? But today he gets to hold the promise. What a blessing that is. And Isaac, this child arrives, and it brings joy. It brings joy, but it also exposes these old compromises, because now we got Isaac in the picture, and now what? Ishmael, the son that was born through human effort, cannot share the same place as Isaac. Conflict, division, strife. But why? Because man inherently acted as God, instead of allowing God to do what God says and just wait and be obedient. So now Hagar sent away. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? She's sent away. And this has to be a painful scene I couldn't imagine. You think of Hagar, but you also think of Sarah. There had to be some form of relationship there. And we want to think that it was always a negative relationship, but the Bible doesn't necessarily say that. There doesn't go have this ongoing conflict between Sarah and Hagar. We had that moment of conflict, and we're about to come into another moment of conflict, but we don't know what this life is like. I know the good example, Caden. You got two women that care for Caden the same way. Could you imagine? Right? I say, I keep Charlie and send Caden away. That has to be hard, because there's two different women that pour two different efforts into one child. And I just sit there and say, Caden, you got to go on your way with Hagar. That would be hard. That would be hard. So in this moment, there's joy, but there's also this hurt that's happening. And this is what God's going to teach us here, that even in the struggles and the self-induced struggles, he's still going to be honoring to his promise. And a lot of us believe that we help God in his decisions, don't we? We think that we're going to act and we're going to do, and we're helping God along in this moment. But what we're really doing is just getting in the way. We really just get in the way. We pray, but then we panic. Have we ever been there? I've been there. We pray and then panic. Why are we panicking? Because we don't trust God. We don't trust God. If we're going to pray, we're going to leave it there in that moment, but we panic. But then we wait. And guess what happens when we wait, when we're panicking? We scheme. We're always setting up a plan and a way to take control of what we got to take control of. But if we just trust, we let go of our backup plans and we trust him. We let go of these backup plans and just trust in him and what he's going to do. So we know, I've said it, this is probably the third or fourth time I said it, God keeps his word. God keeps his promises. And anything outside of that, it's us. We create the problem that separates the promise to compromise. We're compromising the promise because we're acting, we're panicking, and we're not trusting. So will someone read Genesis 21, 1-7 for me? Thank you so much. So it starts off with a bang. So the Lord visited Sarah, and he said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. Exclamation points, right? I'm going to add to that. Boom, here it is. But in that phrase, here's what truly matters. As he said. Underline that. as he said. I don't know what version you said, but it's as he had said, as he had, as he had said. But then he also goes on and he says, as he had spoken. Okay. So here in this moment, God's making sure we don't miss this point. Isaac was not born to Abraham because Abraham was strong. Isaac's not born to Sarah because she finally figured out her routine. No, 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 no. Isaac's born because of God's faithfulness and his promise. Okay. So in this moment, Isaac was born because what? God spoke. God spoke. It's not necessarily the natural selection order of how a baby's made. We know that this womb was barren for such a long time, but God spoke this promise to Sarah. And I love that because we've seen time and time again that women's wombs are closed throughout the Bible. But what happens when that woman finally has a baby in the Bible? That child's usually a pretty powerful piece for God, isn't it? And so in this womb that's been closed, God's the one that opened it up for her. Think about those moments and those times of what we talked about motherhood, praying and praying for God to open this womb, and if your will be done. But in these moments of age creeping into the factor, we start to doubt that the promise is ever going to be fulfilled. But in this moment, Abraham and Sarah waited and waited and waited, and they heard the promise, they carried the promise, they questioned the promise to the point that they laughed. She laughed at the promise. They even stumbled while waiting on the promise. We see all these things, but in this moment, I love Nate says, it's like God factored in their stupidity because God knew they were going to do all these things. God knew that they were going to go through all these, and God still kept his word. God could have easily said, no, I'm going to take back. But God's not a God of taking things back.
Not only kept his word, but blessed their mistake as well.
That's right. Ishmael got a blessing. And so in that moment, this should encourage us because we look at calendars and time and equations and formulas as things have to align, right? Things have to align, but in reality, it's mocking faith. If we're sitting here more devoted about a calendar or strategic formula or plan that we're going to make things work, then we're mocking faith. We have to make sure to surrender this and saying in God's time it will be done. A little vulnerable, or I'm transparent, not vulnerable, transparent. Emily jokes sometimes when she's serious sometimes about wanting to have a kid with me. And I'm like, we're not doing anything we're not it. So if God's will be done, it will be done. All right. So in this moment, can you imagine how tired Sarah would probably have been waiting for this promise? I mean, in this room, be honest. If I was to sit there and say, hey, there's a good thing coming to you, and I leave it at that, how long would it take you for you to start asking me about what that good thing that was coming to you? Yeah, like, what is it? What is it? What's coming? What's coming? And the longer I make you wait, guess what happens? That good thing that's coming that I promised to you, you're going to get a little irritable with me. You may even start getting mad at me. What type of games am I playing with you? One of the things I do in counseling, the guys that struggle with patience, I'll call them in the office and say, man, I got something to tell you. Okay. They want me to tell. I was like, no, I'll tell you later. They keep coming back. They keep coming back. Not yet. I'll give you when I'm ready. And they keep coming back to the point that they start getting angry, start getting mad and but then I use that as a teaching moment. I was like, what's the one thing you struggle with? And I'm intentionally doing this to make you wait, to sit there and say, to work on you, right? To work on you. And so in this moment too, we think that maybe if we're missing this promise, then we think, well, God's not a liar, but maybe maybe I was confused in what I heard. We start playing with that mentality. Well, God's not a liar, but then maybe I misheard God. I mean, how many of us have stepped out in ministry work and we don't see things coming the way they should come, and we're like, right, Nate, anyone else? I don't understand what you're doing, God. Or did I mishear this, God? Or how many of you all felt like you're the crazy person? Like we should be out in the wilderness eating locusts and honey, Yeah, like, why is that? That's us. We start to challenge this mentality, But God's not confused. We create the confusion.
It's obvious where it came from at that point. If it's a short wait, we have a tendency, not always necessarily, but we have a tendency to not give credit where credit's due when
Well,
it's a short wait that happens fast and we just move on. Yeah.
right. Makes sense, right? Makes total sense. And the ones that do, and God does allow blessings to come. Only sometimes I feel like, and I could be wrong about this statement, sometimes he allows them so he can see when they how quick they fall. Then at the bottom of that failure, they're going to look up and really see him. Right. I've seen it time and time again. Too many pastors, they're really good and charismatic and good with the word and this and this. They build up this little mega empire that's all built on them. And then next thing they know, they're in deep on moral failure, sin, or their marriage, or their kids, or whatnot. Something's happening, and at the end of that moment, they're surrendering fully, saying, "God, I'm so sorry." And then they're more powerful in for the kingdom and through Christ. So I get it, Nate. That's good stuff. So what? All right. Does anyone know what Isaac's name actually means? Yeah. Good job. Brownie points. He's so we switched from salvation points to brownie points, and maybe we'll get a whole brownie one day. So it means laughter, right? Names him after the thing at which she did, laughter. And what I love about this is it says, God has made me laugh so that all will hear will laugh with me. What a blessing that is. That's what grace does, right? So I'm going to sit here and talk about my testimony and share and even talk about I'm laughing because I'm a 90-year-old with a baby. Look at God. Look at God. Doesn't he fulfill his promises? In that moment, you can heartily and faithfully say yes. But up until that moment, you're really not sure. So Grace takes this laugh of unbelief and they turn it turns into a laugh of testimony. I do love Altar. I love hearing the same patterns of stories, because if you've been here long enough for Altar, you keep hearing, I should not be here, or I should be in prison, or I should be this, I should be that, I should be dead, I should be this, or my kid, and you keep hearing the grace of God and these testimonies of God restoring and fulfilling, right? And at the end of the day, that testimony is just bound by what Jesus has done on the cross. And it's about their obedience. People don't want to look at the word obedience and they think that's a negative thing, but to be obedient's not to earn any more favor. It's just to give back to who you love. Like a child is obedient to a father, usually, if there's respect and relationship. There's a value there. But if something's missing, it's really hard I've heard guys say, well, you've never been in my life. How I'm never going to listen to you, mentality. So she once laughed, but this is what's turned into now the promise is lying in her arms. Right? What a blessing this is. And this is the moment that God is going to do what he's going to do. And like you're all saying, no one can take credit for it. No one can take credit for this other than God himself gets glorified and magnified. All right, well, someone read verses 8 through 13 for me. So Isaac's growing. Abraham has this great feast, and Isaac's weaned. How old is it when a child's weaned typically? I know, I think it's something like on the 8th day they got to get circumcised, but weaning, I'm not sure how long that is. But this should be a celebration that's joyful. But once again, old compromise comes in. And this is not necessarily Hagar's fault. This is Sarah sees Ishmael mocking. We don't know exactly. Do we know how old Ishmael is probably at this time? Give or take?
10, 5, 13, something like that.
So, this mocking, is it just immaturity? Is it just natural order of things mocking, like a kid would do? But we know that Ishmael was born into Hagar, and so that's already has that conflict, that bad seed that's planted, even though that we don't know exactly the relationship between Hagar and Sarah. 2 and 4 years old. So Ishmael was about 14? Oh, weaned. Okay, so weaned is about 2 to 4 years old, and you said
Well, he was 14 when I was, so he'd have been 16-ish.
18. Oh, yeah. Okay. So teenager. And you also got to take into the eyes of Ishmael. Like, could you imagine that you're not the promised Caden? That would be hard for him. Because I don't care. You can sit there and say you know Jesus, but we don't spiritually mature in Christ until we get older in age. So spiritually, that would be hard for Caden to carry his whole little life. That you're not the promise of God. That would be hard. So now in this moment, what should have been a great feast is now turned into issues, right? And so since Isaac arrived, that old decision is now becoming the problem. It becomes a present problem. And that's what compromise does to our lives. That's how it works. Old decisions are not necessarily immediate until that moment arises and when it comes to fruition. And so we don't always hurt immediately, do we? We can make a bad decision and we can make a poor choice and we have consequences, but we don't hurt, right? Just use this example. People that smoke cigarettes, they're really gambling with their health. In that moment, they don't see the problem, but the day they get diagnosed with lung cancer, then it really becomes a problem. Your compromise of smoking and coping with life because you can't smoking wise, and that moment is a goal, and it creates a sense of coping mechanism, I should say. But in the end, it's going to be what causes cancer that takes your life. You're compromising today. That's why I quit smoking. My dad died of lung cancer. I'm 5 years and 2 months from smoking cigarettes. I never thought I would do it. But I couldn't keep making a compromise of I was still coping. Nicotine still had a draw that didn't allow me fully experience life in emotional terms. I was never completely sober. Once I quit smoking, I was like, what else do I have to quit? And then they said I was diabetic and I had to take out Coca-Colas. Got a good old Diet Coke. But nicotine, it was crazy. You all had to go through it. I didn't know how to fully cope with life without something. Now I'm experiencing life on life's terms without nothing to cope with. Nicotine really helps. So in that moment, the compromise, that's how it works. Sometimes it can grow up in the house. We see this when married couples get together and they blend their families, that's where a lot of trauma can happen amongst kids. And that's where compromise comes because they tend to one couple, they're going to favor one over the other usually. And that creates so much hurt in a child when it's like, as an example, I try my best to love the boys equally, uniquely the way they are because I would never want, since you're my wife, I'm going to tend to you and I'm going to treat Charlie extra and minimize him. Can you imagine what that would do to him? So what happens though is things that we do in our past, these compromises, and there's fear based in all this, it eventually is going to mock the thing that God promises in your life. And that's a hard part to swallow. So God's not abandoning Ishmael in this moment. And that's what we think's happening. And God's not going to forget Hagar either. Like Nate said, there's promises. There's still going to be a promise and a blessing. But this had to be a distinction between what was man-made and what was God ordained. And they can't be in the same realm. There's always going to be division. And what do we have today between Ishmael's and Isaac's? War. Major division, major belief systems that are different, a lot of death, a lot of ongoing death, a lot of kids dying. So later on, Paul uses Galatians 4 to teach us the difference between slavery and a promise. And so sometimes we got flesh versus faith, and we got human effort versus divine grace. And that's what's happening here. So Ishmael is actually representing what man can produce. And we see that still over in those lands and those areas, but Isaac's representing only what God can produce. Can never be man-made. And I think that's a beautiful moment. But those two extremes in the same house is chaos. That's why. What, you were going to say something? That's why Ishmael's and Hagar is being asked to leave. It's hard. It's hard. But in these moments, what do we think about kids and families and relationships? There's habits, there's relationships, there's demeanors, there's attitudes, there's fears, there's hormones, there's all these different things going on. But then God, in order for him to bring his promise to life, the old things in this family have to be dealt with. Because there's even a form of compromise by Abraham, maybe even get to the point, this is just me thinking out loud, oh, well, Hagar and Sarah are going to be good, and I'll have Ishmael my whole life. until Isaac comes, right? I could see that compromise of thinking everything's going to work out in peace and that maybe it's not going to be as extreme as it is, but then that mocking is it opens the can of worms. It opens it. And what happens is this is not managed. These conversations are not truly had. And we see that in relationships and families and marriages is where they don't communicate. What was that thing you shared with me about? You said this is us where they communicate until the point they talk until they
doesn't process until they talk about it. Another one doesn't talk about it until they process it and they marry.
so it's not sometimes it's not prime real estate, but it's amazing though in the end of the day when things are communicated and things are understood and there's boundaries put in place, it really makes a relationship and marriage so much better. Will someone read through 14 through 21 for me? This is painful to read, isn't it? Like a mother's desperation. Could you imagine what that been like for Hagar is to put him under a bush? The waters ran out, and she puts him under the shrub and sits at a distance because she cannot bear to watch him die. That's hard. And this is probably one of the hardest and heartbreaking scenes that we're going to read in Genesis. A mother sitting in the wilderness, empty bottle, empty hands, and a broken heart. But God, verse 17 says, God heard the voice of the lad, the child. Don't pass over this moment. God heard the voice of the child. God heard, right? That's the key part. God heard. The people back in the tents and whatever, they didn't hear. They don't even care most likely, but God heard. And that's what I love about this is people in power may not hear. How many times that people in power miss things, right? It was a baby that God heard. It was a child, well, a 14, 16-year-old, a young man, but still her baby, right? I could never imagine taking Caden and putting him under a shrub and I had to wander off because I couldn't watch him die. Couldn't imagine that. But God hears. He hears the cry under the shrub. He still ministers to the broken in the wilderness. This child didn't ask to be born into these adult decisions, did he? It's a lot of us. We weren't asked to be born to the parents we were born with. We didn't have any decision in any of these factors, but yet we are the ones that are being outcast sometimes. And God hears the outcast, and God hears the forgotten in this moment, and God hears the ones who feels discarded. I've been discarded by someone else's story multiple times in my life. But then angel God calls to Hagar and says, what? Fear not, don't be afraid. That's hard. God tells her that he has heard the voice of the boy, and God opens her eyes and she sees a well of water. That's beautiful to me. Working through this and reading through this, the text does not say God created the well in that moment. God said God opened her eyes. It's not like God just miraculously, but he opened her eyes. What were her eyes focused on? Provision was near, but her despair blinded her to it. To the point she put her child under the shrub because she couldn't witness death, but yet the solution was right there, and God had to open her eyes. That happens to us. How many of us have gotten that moment of despair that we really didn't see the logical answer of what God was doing right there in front of our face? And sometimes that logical answer is in something we never wanted or intended to happen in our lives. Pain can often narrow our vision. Heartache can narrow our vision. Fear can make us look at our circumstances as what's final in our lives too, right? This is final. And the exhaustion, look, how many of y'all been exhausted? Exhaustion can actually convince you that there is no water. There is no way, there's no help, there's no tomorrow. That's what exhaustion does. And exhaustion leads to despair, and despair leads to suicide in most cases. It leads to the thinking that life would be better without me. But God can open your eyes in dry places. God can open these eyes. He can show you the mercy that you cannot see. But he can also reveal this provision that only he could provide in that moment too, that you didn't think existed. He opens your eyes. He's going to meet you in the wilderness. He's going to prove to you that he still loves you. He hears your child. He hears you even when you're being cast out, cast off, and you feel like you're forgotten by God. Will someone read us 22 through 34, please? I love it. So this is a big shift, isn't it? It's a shift from this motherhood story and this outcast story to from Abraham to Abimelech. But what's beautiful about this, and I mean, I use the King James Version on this, which I don't usually do, but I feel like it's more Shakespeare poetic the way it was done. Abimelech sees something in Abraham's life, and he says, God is with thee in all that thou does. Do people say that about us today? Does people say that about you? This is a powerful testimony because Abraham is far from perfect. We know that he's a liar. We know that he's cheated the system. We know that he's slept with a concubine or a slave girl. We know that he's caused strife, and there's things that he's done. He's fought people. He's murdered people because of war, right? Not because he's a murderer, but through war he is. Abraham lied about Sarah being sister. He's acted out of fear, and he's publicly failed. And that's what God's still with him. God's still working with him. God's still working with this individual to the point that Abimelech wants a covenant of peace with him. This is a conversation that's being built up. We know Abimelech was the guy that what did he do to Abimelech? That's my sister. Abimelech almost made a bad choice with his wife. But now we're at this point where Abimelech's starting to see, because prior we know Abimelech wasn't a God-fearing individual, but he was an honorable individual, right, with integrity. But now he's wanting to make a covenant of peace. He recognizes that Abraham is blessed by God. You're blessed by God. Those words are coming out of his mouth, an unbeliever, that you're blessed by God. Well, so there's a relationship that he's seeing, that you're blessed by God. And that's a testimony in itself. So in this moment where he's blessed, he wants assurance from Abraham that he will deal honestly with him, because Abraham, in Abimelech's eyes, is a liar. I need to trust you that you're going to be honest in your word. And then what does Abraham do? He brings up the dispute of this well that Abimelech's servants have seized, and that's when they make the covenant. And that's where the name comes. And Abraham gives sheep and oxen, and he sets this apart. And this is what they do. They give property, they give things as a covenant and a contract for this well. And this is called Beersheba. Why does this matter? Does anyone know? So Abraham's not only receiving promises, at this point, he's now learning to live a faithful witness of who God is in his life. That's what we do. And we need to be a faithful witness to people that are considered, here, look, air quote, outsiders. Outsiders. Abimelech was an outsider. So faith in your life is not a private belief. There's nothing meant to be private about faith. It has to be what I'd say public conduct, something we do publicly. But yet, how many Christians struggle with proclaiming their faith publicly? It's hard. Shouldn't be, but it is. So Abraham's form of worship, his way he worshiped, the way he lived life, is actually starting to encounter in his business transactions. What if we did that? What if our faith and the way we honor God starts showing up in our business transactions? Well, I don't have a business. Yes, you do. You do business daily. You pay your water bill, you pay your electric bill, you pay people, you pay this, you pay that, you work for someone, you do this. You have moments that you can bring God into your business. So, God has existed before Abraham, and God's always been faithful. God's going to be faithful after Abraham's gone, and God is not just trapped into this one generation. Okay, so God's not trapped to generations, because Ishmael and Isaac are going to be two different nations and two different generations. But I love this. Abraham plants a tree because he believes God's promise has roots. God's promise has roots. I used to do this thing, and it's positive psychology. And it was an exercise, and it was this tree, and it had the roots in the ground. And I said, write out what your roots are in your life. People would put jobs, money, family, all these things. And that's what's feeding the nutrients of your tree. And then what comes from that tree trunk is the outpouring of the fruit. So today, what I want you all to look at is draw a little tree when you get home. What is your roots? God, Christ, family, money, whatever, work, career, identity. What are your roots? And that's what your fruit is going to be producing from. If it's worldly things, then you're going to produce worldly fruits. And so in this moment, he plants this tree, and that's what faith does, is faith plants trees in our lives that's not fully inherited yet. We might not have the full promise of what this is looking like. I'm trying to say this in a way that's what we do here, I know means a lot for all of us that are here. This is family. But when, and this is not Dusty's fault, but when we're talking about what we do as a ministry, it seems kind of like, to his eyes, it's like it's a dead ministry. It's in a dead area. It's tough. People don't support, the community don't support, can't get the addicts to buy it. You know what I'm saying? In that whole mentality, he sees that it seems like it's dead. And it's easy to feel that way in some ways when it comes to helping addicts mentality. Not us, what we do here on Sunday. I always separate those two. But what he does say is that we are planting this tree of faith in a really hard area. So as a ministry, and this is just talks that we're having, is I have to maintain faith. I don't understand it, right? I don't understand the outcome of what this is going to be, but I have to maintain the faith that God's going to do what he's going to do. And I have to be available, and I have to be ready, but I also have to show that my faith is visible. Some of the things that people say to me is like, all the doors that are slammed in your face, you're still doing this. Older boy Nick, he's not around very much, but that's one thing he said that he sees in me. It's like all the things that were slammed in your face, all the things that were done, that you've never stopped believing in what you believe in. That's powerful. Maybe that's a piece that he can hold on to, because people should look at our dealings, and people should look at our word and our honesty and the way we handle ourselves with conflict, or even our way of repenting, but also our generosity. And at the end of that day, all that is what? Worship. It's worship to God, and I'm saying outwardly in a way that God's with me. God's with me. I have no doubt. Some days I do fight the fight. Some days I do struggle, but at the end of the day, I do know he's with me. And I keep looking, because I look at my life, because I'm like, man, I'm flawed. But Abraham was flawed. But in him, in Christ, we're made perfect. And so am I looking at what my efforts get me? Not using this as hyper grace. I'm not co-signing this as hyper grace in any way, but am I really looking at where my heart is and where my life is? Do I need to start living life with covenant integrity in all ways? So, with that being said, this chapter is about motherhood. It's about a blessing, but it's also about a pain. There's two forms of motherhood here. One that just got the promise and life and all the things that are coming together. And then there's a mother that was just putting her son under a shrub to not watch him die. There's motherhood that sees the promise, and there's a mother that was so much in despair that she couldn't see the solution. There's two forms of motherhood here. But what we know is that Isaac was born at an appointed time. Jesus Christ comes in the fulfillment. He fulfills this essence of time, doesn't he, when he dies on the cross for us. Isaac was brought in with laughter from Sarah, But Jesus brings us this eternal joy, that trust in him. And that's what we have to hang on to, is like, what is this peace and this joy that I experience in my life, and what's keeping me from it? All right, y'all. So today is Mother's Day. And I hope that moms, which is the topic for today, and even fathers, that we don't try to just be better moms, or we don't just try to be better dads. What we need to be is have a better covenant with the Lord. Take what he's done in our lives and what he's done on the cross for us, and take that and live life as it is finished. That we're not stuck to our past decisions or past behaviors or past mentality. But if you keep yourself there in those thoughts, then you're going to stay there. Or you can walk out of here today and say that I'm in this covenant with Jesus Christ himself. What did you say, Jen? I am. Whatever comes behind it is what you believe. That's your roots of your tree trunk. I am crazy. I am depressed. I am this. I am that. I'm bipolar. I'm up and down. Or I'm not a good mom. I'm not a good dad. I'm this. I'm this. Guess what the devil's doing? At this point, he's like, I'm going to keep throwing every scenario at you. Every scenario. Every moment that I feel like something tickles whatever I'm believing, I get defensive or hurt or sad. And guess what? I get to that moment to where I'm going to take and place whatever under that tree and just can't watch it die. That's where the devil wants to keep us trapped. What's that? Yeah. 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 I love this because my mentor, he says, John, I'm not a word of faith guy, but we can't minimize what we do say out of our mouths. Yeah. Life and death of the tongue. But think about it this way. The devil doesn't have access to your thoughts, your mind. He doesn't know all. God does, right? God knows everything. Your stupidity, your bravery, your surrenderness, or whatever. But the devil only knows what you throw out. If I say I'm a bad father, now you give the minions of the devil and everything to do everything to remind you in every circumstance and every situation that you're not a good father, that you're not a good mother. So be careful with what you say. All right. Will someone close us in prayer and bless the food? And I'm going to have a lady close us in prayer because it's Mother's Day. Men, you go next door. Will you grab the stuff for me? You want to do what after the prayer? You want to go? Okay. Let's get a lady to close us in prayer today.
Father, thank you for this day that we set aside to honor mothers in a special way. Lord, I ask you to just do it all.